Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Friday, December the 9th, 2022. Thank you for tuning in. I'm glad to have you guys here. Now, here's what I want to say. You know, there's a lot of potential crises out there that could happen in the world. And there are a few of them that we actually know is going to happen. One is, we know there's going to be more earthquakes. I mean, nobody's going to argue that. Sooner or later, there's going to be a big earthquake. Maybe near you, where you live. We know that there is a potential for meteors and asteroids and comets to come out of space and potentially make huge problems for the Earth, potential catastrophes. We also know that diseases, like we had the Spanish flu back in 1918, and now we just got over COVID. We know that they're going to be coming along every now and again. We just know that. Certain disasters, you know, are going to happen. They happen on a periodic cycle. But being able to predict a disaster and knowing that there's a disaster coming, like if there were people that worked on a dam, you know, for instance, and the water builds up behind the dam and makes pressure and they can see cracks developing in the dam, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the dam is actually going to break at a certain point in time. But pinpointing the exact minute that the dam's going to break is a different thing altogether. You can say, okay, the dam's going to break, probably in the next, I don't know, and maybe it might break tomorrow, it might break 2 weeks from now, it might break a month from now, it's developing cracks in it, it's raining, we're going to get more and more rain, the dam's going to break, you know it's going to break. But you don't know the exact minute. We have a disaster that's like that right now, that can be predicted because it's math. It's going to happen for absolutely sure. But predicting exactly when is very, very difficult. And this is a disaster that's man-made. It's been in the makings for over 100 years. Maybe you guys, some of you know what it is. But for you guys who don't know what it is, I'm going to explain it to you guys in quite good detail. And why it's potentially, it has the power to wipe out a good portion of humanity. Possibly it's going to be as powerful a disaster, nearly as powerful as what a full-scale nuclear war would be. And it's right under everybody's nose. It's a well-known thing that's going to happen. And I don't talk about it often, go over it much, but I'm going to be going over it in this show. And after I get done going over it, then I'm going to go over the markets. It's a disaster that's man-made. It was created... It started back in 1913 with the advent of the Central Bank of the United States of America and all the other central banks, who all work in conjunction. They set up a Ponzi scheme. And how Ponzi schemes works, well, I'll explain it to you very simply, is when I was a young fella, you know, living down around near Orlando, Florida, there was a Ponzi scheme I didn't know was a Ponzi scheme. And I got involved in it, but not involved in it as is losing my money. There was these earthworm businesses opened up. And they said that they were selling the earthworms for fishermen out there. They're called regworms. And what they would do is, the guy that owned the earthworm business, he said, well, okay, what I'll do is, I will sell you a kit. To anybody who comes in, I'll sell them a kit. I think it was I remember right, I think it was like $1,000 or something. They buy a kit. In the kit, he'd give you everything you need to start up and start growing these earthworms. And these earthworms would grow. Very quickly, they would multiply. I think it was every 2 weeks, they'd double the number of earthworms you had in your kit, if you followed the instructions. He also sold a contract with that. The contract basically said, we will buy all these earthworms off you at X amount. I think if I remember right, it was like $4 or $5 a pound, something like that. Anyway, we'd buy them all off you in the contract for the price that the contract says. So all he had to do, was the guy who was selling these contracts, wait for the first person to come in and buy a contract and set up and start growing these earthworms and selling them back to him. Then he would use those earthworms that was being sold back to him to in turn supply more kits. I think it needed like 20 pounds of earthworms to supply a kit. So then that person would start selling them back, the earthworms, and he would buy them legitimately. And they'd make good money, and they'd tell all their friends, hey, I'm making good money. I bought this kit off of this guy, and I've already made my money back, and he's still buying more, and I'm making great money. But then he's buying them back, the earthworms, and he's selling them to other people out there, other suckers. And it grows, and word goes out, and everybody thinks that there's companies and stuff buying these earthworms off of him. But actually, he's just turning them around, selling them the earthworms to more suckers. And this is how a Ponzi scheme works. A Ponzi scheme works on the greater fool theory. That there's always going to be a greater fool out there to buy what you've just bought at a higher price. This is how they've set the dollar up. As nothing, believe it or not now, all you guys out there might be tuning in to me for the first time. There is nothing behind the dollar except for just the polymer or paper that it's printed on. Nothing backing it at all. Can you believe this? Now I know for you guys listening for the first time, maybe there's a few people in my audience never heard this before and don't understand it. But your money you have in your pocket right now is absolutely worthless. It's only means something, or it means anything, is because the Federal Reserve says it means something. But in truth, in reality, it's a pipe dream. It all doesn't mean anything. It's all worthless. It's totally worthless. Now you say, well, if it's worthless, how come I can purchase things with it? That's because the majority of people believe it has worth. It's a confidence game, similar to a Ponzi scheme. And like a Ponzi scheme, this only functions if they continue to create more and more of these monetary units. It's set up that way. Going back to 1913, when it was really established was 1914. That's when it really got underway, this Ponzi scheme. Now up for the first number of years, from 1914 until 1971, it was backed by gold. And they had Nixon, called the Nixon shock. He had to shut that off. That's when it truly became a confidence game. But in order to keep the confidence game going, Kissinger traveled over to the Arab countries and set up a deal with the Arabs, with the Saudi nations and the oil production over there. That the dollar, that the United States would protect them if they would only sell their oil denominated in dollars. And this gave the dollar a certain amount of backing. It made it into something called the petrodollar. At that point in time, all of the other fiat currencies as well, because there's other countries involved in this. In fact, the whole Western hemisphere, the whole Western side of the world, half of the world is involved in this Ponzi scheme. It's enormous in scope. All of their currencies are pegged to the dollar, and the dollar is basically has a loose peg to oil. Now the eastern side of the world is trying to erode that peg, and they're being very successful at it. So this is kind of like a war going on right now. It's an economic war because there's a vulnerability in the West, because we've built our whole entire financial system on a Ponzi scheme. The East is eyeing that, and they understand that just as well as what I'm talking to you right now. And they're trying to bring it down. They're trying to demolish it. And there's an economic war going on right now where the eastern side of the world is trying to haul the moorings out from underneath this Ponzi scheme and bring it down and bring everything in the Western world down to its knees with it. And like I said at the very beginning of this, it's inevitable that it has to happen at a certain point in time, when confidence becomes eroded to the point where people do not want to save or keep their dollars anymore, when they start throwing in the towel. It's basically similar to a poker game, when the guy who's been, when the stakes just get too high and they start throwing in their hands and they say, okay, let's see what you got. And they basically throw their cards down and they got nothing in their hand, they were bluffing. And so we're getting closer and closer to that point in time when this is going to happen. The only thing that has real value in this system is the businesses, the land, gold and silver. I'm naming the only things in this whole system that have real value. Infrastructure, real things that you can put your hands on, tangible things. Like if a person owns an electrical company, he's got a whole power grid, and a part of the power grid, and he's selling electricity to people, and if he has that business, and it's an active business, that's worth something in the real world. Gold and silver, tangible asset. Hold it in your hand, it's worth something in the real world. Farmland, things like that. But all of this monetary system and all of its assets that are not real assets, all they are is just things that are written on paper, they can all evaporate overnight. Never forget that. And that's what's going to happen, because we're heading toward that point in time. And I'll explain to you one thing more, because some of you guys haven't heard of this before. That you do know about inflation. You do know that when you were a kid, if you're of any age at all, over say 20 years of age, you realize that things were cheaper when you were younger. Well, this effect is much greater if you're an older person. You really see the effect. If you're an older person, you remember the time when you could go out and get a candy bar and it was a big candy bar. It wasn't like the candy bars you get now. They've reduced the size down, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Back in those days, you get a big candy bar. The size now they call a family-size candy bar was just your standard, ordinary-size candy bar back then. And some of you guys don't know that, but I'm just telling you. And it was a lot cheaper than it is now. And you can really see this effect as you go back in time. Now, if you go all the way back to 1913 when the Fed was established, a dollar bought a dollar's worth of stuff. Now, how much stuff did it buy? It's lost over 97% of its purchasing power. So there's only 3% left. That means that now what a dollar 3 cents would buy back in 1913, what 3 pennies would buy, now it takes a whole dollar to buy. Or to put that in other terms, and you can see it with gas prices. I remember when I was a younger guy, and I'm not that old. I remember gas at I think it was 10 cents a gallon. I think there was a service station called 5 Aces or something. Well, they were having a gas war because the regular price I think was like 23 cents or something back then. And they were having a gas war, and it was like 10 cents a gallon in Daytona Beach, Florida. Back, I think it was around 1970 something. But the point is, the regular price back then I think was like 23 cents. The point is, what is it now? $3 and something. Now, for years the Fed told us that they were shooting for a 2% inflation target. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they had 2% inflation back before we had this little bump up in inflation. Say they had 2% inflation. It would take 50 years for prices to double at 2%. But how come we've seen, like I'll tell you what, I went in yesterday, I was looking at tar in the store, roofing tar, plastic cement that goes on your roof, a 5-gallon pail of plastic cement. And I remember back in the 1980s, might have even been the 1990s, buying it for $10. Now it was like $43.99 or something like that, something ridiculous. And that means the first doubling would be to $20 from $10, and then the double again would be to $40. That means it's doubled twice in the period of like 30 years. It's doubled twice. That's 100% and then 100% again. Now, if they're correct with the 2% business, it would have taken 100 years for it to double that much, not 30 years. So something's screwy there. because they were saying that they were under 2%. I think something's screwy when they're telling you what the inflation numbers are right now. I think when they tell you like 8%, it's actually 16, maybe 20%, in truth. Maybe even higher. So yeah, it's come down a little bit. But it's still rather high, really high. It's probably, right now, if they come down from 9%, I haven't got the latest CPI numbers, but if they come down from 8 point something percent, and down now they say it's maybe 7 or something like that. I haven't got the latest numbers, so I don't know what it is, but you can bet it's double that probably, or even triple. They're lying through their teeth. And at the same time, we get all these products. Like I was in the roofing section looking at the plastic cement, okay? And I saw this flashing that goes on houses. You know, the flashing is what goes on the edge of the house, or edge of the roof to keep it from leaking. It's a galvanized sheet metal, okay? And the last time I was in there and you grabbed a piece of that galvanized sheet metal, it was solid and rigid in your hand. Because it's supposed to be sheet metal to go on the edge of the roof. It's supposed to last 50 years. So I went to pick up the piece. And oh my goodness, it was like tissue paper. It was the gauge, what they call a gauge of metal, is the thicker metal is, the more that changes the gauge of the metal. What they've done is they've made it about 4 times thinner. The new stuff. And I can tell you right now, even though it's galvanized, it's only going to last about 10 years until it becomes perforated and your roof starts to leak. So these new homes are building out here. All these new homes, every new home. If you've just bought a new home, you've been screwed on the roof. Because all of the flashing on your roof, probably in 10 years from now, is going to start to leak all at once. Be perforated because it's so thin. It's not going to stand up. The older stuff stood up for 40 years, 50 years before it needed replacing. Your roof's going to be screwed because they're doing that with everything across the board. All of the products that you buy they're cutting corners. China started it, cutting corners on products, making products flimsy or whatever. And now all of the manufacturers around the world are doing the same thing, and they're cutting, they're continued cutting. They're every bit that they can get away with, they're getting away with right now, of giving you less for more price. So this is all part of this Ponzi scheme that's starting to come apart at the seams. And I'm going to guarantee you guys that this is the dam is getting ready to break. And this is why they don't care. They don't care that in 10 years your house is going to be leaking, because they're not going to get sued for it. And the reason why is because the system's going down. The system is going down because it's a Ponzi scheme. And this like that earthworm guy. Remember I told you about the earthworm guy selling all the earthworms? What he did was he realized that when he had more earthworms coming in, he was having to purchase, than was going out. That very night he packed up his bags, withdrawed all his money from wherever he was keeping it, in a satchel or whatever, put it in the trunk of his car, and he left town. That's how it worked, because the people are going to come after him. He closed up business that very night when more earthworms were coming in than he could sell out the door for people buying them. That's when the Ponzi scheme peaks. Well, I'm going to tell you about this. The Ponzi scheme here peaked in 2008. And they've been keeping it running up till now with just basically extending and pretending, kicking the can down the road. And right now they've reached the point where now they're being forced to cut back, but you can't cut back on a Ponzi scheme, because if you try to taper it, it blows up. That's how close we are. Okay, now let's get into the markets. Now that I had my say, let's start the charts right here and take a look at what's going on. We're just going to run through them quick. 23 cents up for silver today at $23.29. Gold today, we're looking at up $6.20, $17.95 today. Cryptos, we're at 858 billions. Now, I want to say gold, silver, and cryptos is the only thing that are deflationary assets that are going to make it through this whole thing. What's the big winner going to be? Will it be gold, silver, or cryptos? I think they're all going to win. I think the dollar is going to be the big loser. The dollar and all of the other fiat currencies that go with it eventually is going to be the big winner. Big loser, I should say. And if you're invested in them, you're going to be the big loser. It doesn't matter if you got a... Look, I'll tell you how profound it is. You could have two men living... Say one guy's got 20 acres and he's got a big mansion worth $12 million he lives in. He's got millions of dollars in the bank. And his neighbor right next door to him is living in a double-wide trailer and got hardly anything. And he got a couple $1,000s in the bank. He has only a little bit of money, right? So the guy in the mansion, he's got all of his whole portfolio of all these digital assets, all of stocks, bonds. He's got all of this kind of stuff. He's got a lot of it too. Big portfolio. But there's a guy in the trailer got next door. Well, he invested his $2,000. He invested $1,000 of it in Bitcoin and cryptos, and he invested the other $1,000 in real physical gold and silver. So the crisis hits. The guy that's on the big piece of land and got all that money, he loses everything because he didn't have any gold and silver and he didn't have any cryptos. All he had was just stock market portfolio and blah, blah, blah. And he's all invested in dollars. Everything's dollars. The whole thing's dollars. And the dollar disintegrates to nothing. He loses it all, including his house and everything else. But the guy that living next door in a double-wide mobile home, all of that wealth transfers. And that's what's going to happen eventually. It has to. There's no place else for it to go. The dollar is going to go into a hyperinflation. It's going to hyperinflate into nothing. In the end, it goes to zero. So it's going to be a wealth transfer. Unheard of magnitude. Where all the wealth in the Western world is going to be transferred over into real hard tangible assets. Like things like what I started my show, I told you, like things like farmland and things like businesses and things that you can actually put your hands on. And gold, silver, and cryptos, if you are holding the private keys, are similar in the respect that... See, this is the problem, is they're doing the same thing with cryptos on these exchanges. They're selling more crypto, the same thing the bankers do, where they sell more than what they actually have as derivative products. This is basically what they've turned the dollar into, is an enormous derivatives product. It's what they try to turn gold and silver into as well, the paper markets. This system is so screwed up. Anyway, Bitcoin at 17,186 and Ethereum at 1,276. Dow Jones Industrial Average today is down 18 points. I know that some of you guys out there that are listening to my show didn't understand that the whole system is a Ponzi scheme. Didn't understand that the whole system is a racket. And that it's going to eventually collapse. It has to collapse because it's math. And the Ponzi scheme part of it, just like the earthworm part of it, the Ponzi scheme part of it is that when they create what they call money, is actually created from debt. In other words, it's a loan. There's interest owed on that loan. But say they create $100. The Fed creates $100. Well, there's interest on that $100, but they only create the $100. They don't create the interest. What happens is that interest keeps piling up and piling up and piling up into a bigger and bigger pile. At a certain point in time, unless 100 years goes by, the interest owed is larger than the principal outstanding. That's where we're at now. The principal outstanding, I think, is something like $2 trillion or... Oh, no, not $2 trillion, but it's how much currency is out there, how much money, what they call money, is out there is actually debt. If you took it all and piled it all together in a big pile, it would not pay off what's owed. So there'd be nothing left, and still you'd owe a lot. So you can't pay off the debt ever. And you get these politicians out there, oh, we need to pay off the debt. They don't understand how this system works. You can't pay off the debt. This is why it's a Ponzi scheme. And the ones who really make the money are the ones who are lending this money out to the because they create it from nothing. They're the ones who are benefiting because they create it. They create what we call money from nothing, and then they buy real things with it. Like the central bank, they create this Ponzi scheme money from nothing, and what do they buy? Mortgage-backed securities. You've heard that they were buying mortgage-backed securities during quantitative easing. That's your house. They bundle the houses up into what they call securities, mortgages. They bundle them up into a big bundle, and they repackage them as mortgage-backed securities. And so when the central bank's buying mortgage-backed securities, they're buying up your mortgage. They own it. So they own your house. They've just bought your house. They've just bought you. You're a slave to them. And now they're going to crush you out of existence because they got a bunch of robots coming in to do your job. They don't need you anymore. And so this is allowed to go on and on and on. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's going to break in the end. And say goodbye when this thing breaks because it's so big. I pity you. I pity you, and I pity me, and I pity everybody that's involved in this because they've set everybody up. They've set us all up for the biggest fall of our lives. It's amazing. It's that more people don't know about this and more people are not outraged. Anyway, crude oil, $71.94. It's up 48 cents. Now, move index today, 129.54. I am personally very glad if you guys are out there and this is the first time you're hearing about all this. I am absolutely very glad that I'm the guy that lets you know about it. Now, let other people know that we're living on borrowed time because the Federal Reserve has set up a Ponzi scheme with our global monetary system. And at a certain point, I don't know when, this is all about, started this channel, and I learned back around, about this, I think back around 2012, 2013. I set up this channel to let people know. Let people know about this because this, when it breaks down, it's a threat to humanity. Because it's a money system. Everything out there runs on what we call money. And if it's not really money, doesn't really have value. And if it breaks apart and loses that value and people lose confidence in it, we got a total mess with the system falling apart. Something like what happened during the fall and decline of the Roman Empire. You remember that Nero fiddled while Rome burned? We're talking about the same thing happening here. Who's ever in charge would be sitting there playing a fiddle while all the Western world burns. It's not a pleasant prospect, especially when we don't know how to raise our own food any longer. Just think about it for a little bit. Think about that. Think about everything, basically the power going off, and it ain't coming back on anytime soon. Think about what would happen. Okay. 10 years at 3.54 and the US 30 years at 3.52. Even the 10 to 30 years inverted right now. I mean, the whole thing is just like, and we're seeing rising yields today. But look at the size of the inversion out to the 6 month. A 6 month at 4.73 and a 30 year at 3.52. The size of that inversion. That's an indicator that we are getting close to this thing cracking. We're so close to it cracking that I would say that this is why the Chinese and Russians are trying to keep the heat on us. They got the pedal to the metal right now. They're doing everything that they can do less of blowing the world up. To put the pressure on. They're using economic pressures to they're using winter as a weapon. They're doing everything that they can do over in the East to try to bring us down in flames. But because we're a Ponzi scheme, we're sitting on the edge and ready to blow up anyway. Most people think everything's fine, everything's okay right now. Had little clue what's really going on behind the scenes, and how everything's not okay, and how the whole system could just, one morning, you could just wake up, and seriously, you're like, what's wrong with my phone? You're like, how come the lights are out? You just wake up in the morning, and you think, oh, it must be a power outage, it must be something local wrong with the power supply and whatever. And that's it. You're in it. You're in it. And you won't be able to get news. You might not get news again for if you can stay alive for the following year after that happens. You might not get news for like a whole year of what just happened. That's the kind of world we're in right now. And everybody thinks it's okay. Everybody thinks everything's great. It just might go out with a whimper and just everything turns off. That's your sign that it's starting. Well, not right away. You won't know it started right away. You'll just think it's a local outage or whatever. And that might go on for 2 weeks. Anyway, dollar index at 104.87. I think I've explained to you guys pretty good the situation that we're in right now. This is real. I wish what I was telling you right now was all a bunch of malarkey, all a bunch of baloney. I wish. The sad part about it is we are living in something that is just this dire, and I call it a sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. And it's all man-made. Man-made problems. Things could have been structured so much differently. Catch you guys in the next show and have a great day. Bye-bye.